Who are some of the most spoiled kids out there? Let's get right into it and start with number 5, Punch Drunk? Alexandra Jackson, daughter to country superstar Alan Jackson, faced charges of assault, underage drinking, and resisting arrest following a 2013 traffic stop. Her father might have been considered one of the best singer-songwriters in country music, but that didn't give her a free pass when she disrespected Nashville Metro police officers. She was riding in the passenger seat of a Range Rover that a Nashville police officer caught driving over the speed limit. While speaking to the driver, the officer could tell that Jackson was intoxicated and getting aggressive. Jackson began to make demands as she stormed out of the car. The officer's attempts to get her back in the vehicle only further enraged her. When he threatened her with the possibility of being arrested, she struck him in the chest. The officer had to call for backup while trying to arrest her as she continued to fight. Eventually, she complied with the arrest and was taken into police custody. While being booked, she told the officers that she could get her dad to do whatever it would take to get her out of trouble, going as far as to bribe them. They warned her against bribing or attempting to bribe an officer. During her court hearing, Jackson avoided jail time and reached a plea deal. She had to take anger management and alcohol safety courses and participate in community service. Number 4, like father, like son. T.I. and Tiny Harris's son, King Harris, was arrested in August 2022 for not wearing his seatbelt. Someone posted his mugshot online, and after it went viral, Harris took to Instagram to tell his followers what happened, filming a series of videos to tell his side of the story. Some accused him of trying to act gangster, despite leading a privileged lifestyle after he posted a selfie where he was pointing his middle finger at the camera. King filmed his response while he was enjoying a bubble bath because even real thugs like Mr. Bubble. In the video, he addressed critics, claiming he didn't try to get the police to pull him over and acknowledging that he had a good life. King was also upset that nobody acknowledged that he dropped new music, likely because nobody knew or cared. His stage name was Kid Sayin, and he dropped a new track called New King of the South, a nod at his dad's own self-proclamation back in the day. Claiming that people were only focusing on the arrest rather than his new music video, he lashed out at his fans for not focusing on what truly mattered to him. A video clip surfaced online where viewers could hear a female voice explaining Harris's charges to him. The officer arrested him for not wearing his seatbelt, although he claimed that officers also asked him to submit blood. According to Harris, they wanted to check his mouth and tongue to see if he smoked, but he wouldn't let them. T.I. spoke out against his son, saying that he was a good kid but was focusing on the wrong stuff. He admitted that neither he nor his wife Tiny could get through to their kid and that they would put their faith in God regarding handling the situation. In their defense, just do nothing and pray about it is no doubt top advice in countless parenting books because, of course, it always works. The arrest wasn't the first time people raised concerns about Harris's behavior. In May 2022, he visited a Waffle House restaurant and ordered takeout. King took to Instagram Live to record himself sitting in the backseat of a car where he checked his order. His food came with pickles, which he didn't want. So he stormed back into the establishment because God help him if he finds pickles. King approached the Waffle House workers and cussed them out. An employee told him to stop cursing inside the restaurant, which only made King angrier. That was a mistake. King told them he could do whatever he wanted. Then, King taunted the workers and, in a truly baller move, bragged that he had their entire yearly wage in his pocket. If flaunting inherited wealth doesn't impress them, what will? Then, he took out a stack of cash and showed them his dad's money, proving his impressive claim and obviously commanding the respect Waffle House should be giving him. King then threatened to pistol whip an employee for disrespecting him. He must not have been suitably impressed. The cook offered to meet him outside, but King bravely sped off, feeling he'd taught Waffle House a lesson about respect. In 2020, an 8-second video clip also showed King fighting another boy in a school bathroom. They were each throwing and ducking punches until it escalated. King threw his opponent against the wall and elbowed him to the ribs. Sounds like T.I. and Tiny needed to start putting their faith in God to help King sooner. Seriously, who else is supposed to raise, discipline, and teach their child? Them? Absurd! It's obviously God's job. Number 3, Hot Ferrari. In 2015, a rich kid set his Ferrari on fire because he wanted a newer Ferrari. The vehicle was worth $250,000, but he wanted his Swiss millionaire father to buy him a different model. We've all been there, right? Well, it's relatable to us anyway. The kid was justifiably upset that his Ferrari was no longer the best and most up-to-date model, but didn't want to tell his father how desperately he needed a newer Ferrari. The Ferrari wasn't even this poor kid's only car, but the collection looks bad without the newest Ferrari. In fact, he had 14 other cars, including a Lamborghini. But like, how boring, right? A Lamborghini? Like he's supposed to be happy with that? His father also barely paid him a decent $10,000 a month allowance and gave him a stupid $30 million property portfolio. These pittances were nothing next to the new Ferrari he needed. Life is hard sometimes, as he's quickly learning. After talking to a car sales associate about his dilemma, the associate jokingly advised that he commit insurance fraud to get money to get the correct Ferrari. The kid decided that it was actually a really good idea and organized to have it set on fire. Not just stolen or anything. This wasn't the newest Ferrari and needed to be removed from the planet immediately. He found 3 accomplices and paid them $15,000 to drive the car across the Swiss border into Germany, where they would set it alight. While they were doing his dirty work, he went for a massage to have an alibi in his dumb old Lamborghini. Everyone at the massage parlor was probably laughing at him. Unfortunately, the whole act was caught on security cameras. While they successfully destroyed the car, he couldn't claim the insurance money as he had hoped and was left without a replacement for the vehicle, aside from the 13 other cars he owned and the stupid, dumb Lamborghini. He received 22 months probation for his attempted fraud, and he was forced to pay a $44,000 fine, which is 4.5 months of his allowance. So unfair! We're sure a real lesson was learned that day about appreciating what you have and not setting fires to exotic sports cars. This kid will likely grow up to be a wonderful member of society. Number 2, patricide over allowance. Tommy Gilbert Jr. killed his father after the elder Gilbert threatened to cut off his son's allowance. On January 4, 2015, Gilbert visited his parents' apartment on Manhattan's East Side, where he wanted to speak with his father. After asking his mother to go to the store and get him a sandwich and a soda, he shot his father, Tom Gilbert Sr., in the head, killing him instantly. Before Tommy left the room, he placed the .40 caliber Glock pistol in his father's hand and angled his fingers around so it looked like he was clutching it, leaving his mom to discover the chilling scene. Gilbert had delusions that started when he was a child. Some people and places were what he considered contaminated, such as New York's JFK Airport. He probably wasn't wrong about that, though. Once Tommy was on his way to Princeton with his father when they pulled over for gas near JFK. Gilbert claimed the place contaminated his clothing and was one of the most traumatic things he had ever experienced. Let us say that again. Stopping at a gas station near JFK Airport is the most traumatic thing Thomas Gilbert Jr. has ever experienced. Despite never being formally charged, some people suspected that he tried to kill a former roommate. Gilbert was convinced that Peter Smith was out to get him, despite there being absolutely no reason to think that. In October of 2013, Gilbert and Smith had attended the premiere of And After All, a short film in which Gilbert appeared as an extra, and had been co-produced by a mutual friend. After the premiere, Smith emerged onto the street when Gilbert stepped out of nowhere and jumped him. Gilbert repeatedly slammed Smith's head against the pavement. Gilbert had broken his nose and given him a concussion. When confronted by mutual friends, Gilbert went completely off the deep end, going on a rage-filled diatribe that was incomprehensible. Smith fled and was granted an order of protection. It didn't end there, with Gilbert and his friends regularly calling the SPCA to have Smith investigated for animal abuse. Of course, nothing was ever found because Peter Smith wasn't abusing his dog. A year later, Smith's Hamptons house burned to the ground after someone threw a Molotov cocktail into the residence. Usually, Smith would have been home alone, but thankfully, he had a friend over. Gilbert refused to get a proper job and was often described as a man-child. He was spoiled and would spend his time taking frequent surfing trips overseas and taking certain illegal substances. Tom Gilbert Sr. was a hedge fund manager and gave his son all the cash he needed, because nothing creates wonderful humans like inherited wealth. Tom supplied Tommy with a weekly allowance, financed his Jeep, paid for expensive club memberships, and helped out with any other costs his son had. Gilbert's name was even on his father's firm's payroll, but nobody that worked there knew what he did. Even though he had his allowance, Gilbert often approached his mother and asked her for more money. In 2020, 2012, when Tommy was 28, his parents gave him $74,000 and increased his allowance to $10,000 a month. When his father began to cut his allowance, Gilbert found other ways to make money, like buying a credit card skimmer. Then he contacted a real estate agent and asked that she sell his parents' Hampton home. It was soon apparent that he wouldn't get the money he needed until his father was dead. Gilbert's mother told the police that her son had murdered his father. Following his arrest, Gilbert went to Rikers Island to await trial. His lawyer at the time repeatedly argued that his client wasn't mentally fit to take the stand. While in jail, Gilbert's mental health steadily declined. He stopped taking his medication and tried to start fights with other inmates. Tommy asked a friend to host a fundraiser to help him with his legal defense, but his friend refused, as nobody would want to help get a spoiled kid who went after his own dad get out of jail. Tommy argued with his lawyer about taking an insanity defense and eventually wrote to the Manhattan District Attorney to ask for a public defender because he wanted to fire his attorney. Then, Tommy claimed to be suffering from radiation poisoning after swallowing a battery, but during his x-ray, it was clear he was holding the battery over his stomach. The jury had to decide whether Gilbert was mentally competent at the time he went after his father. He wasn't in court for most of the proceedings, as he kept either asking to leave the room. When he was there, he was constantly interrupting the proceedings. Eventually, the jury deemed he was sane the day he killed his father on the grounds that he had his mother leave to get him lunch so she wouldn't be home when he pulled the trigger. To the jury, a crazy person wouldn't have had a plan. John Glatt is the author of Golden Boy, A Murder Among Manhattan Elite, a book detailing Tommy Gilbert Jr.'s story, disagreed with the jury's outcome. Glatt believed that Gilbert was incompetent to stand trial, having been uncooperative and sabotaging his own defense. During the trial, Tommy wouldn't acknowledge his lawyer and tried to get the jury to declare it a mistrial. He had to be dragged out of court after addressing them directly. Today, Gilbert is serving 30 years to life and is serving his sentence in the Clinton Correctional Facility in Dannemora, New York. His earliest potential release date isn't until April 2044. Number 1. Baby daddy troubles. Ayanna Mayweather, daughter of boxer Floyd Mayweather, was charged with aggravated assault with a deadly weapon after being involved in a 2020 stabbing. Floyd Mayweather is often considered the greatest boxer of his era and one of the best in the sport's history. His net worth is $450 million, and 21 years into his career, his fights still generate millions of dollars of revenue. However, Ayanna Mayweather couldn't use her father's famous name to get out of trouble when a fight over her fiancé, NBA YoungBoy, escalated. Ayanna visited her fiance's house where she confronted LaPatra Lashai Jacobs, who was at the NBA YoungBoy estate late at night. They were probably just talking and hanging out though. It was 1:30 a.m. when she arrived at NBA YoungBoy's Houston home and found Jacobs inside. She told Jacobs that she was NBA YoungBoy's fiance and insisted that Jacobs needed to leave. Jacobs, apparently also seeing Mr. YoungBoy as a real catch, refused to leave. So Mayweather charged her with 2 knives and stabbed her twice. You would assume 1 stab per knife, but the details are fuzzy. One of those knives could still be considered new. An ambulance took Jacobs to the hospital where she underwent surgery for multiple lacerations on her arm. When police arrived, Mayweather told them it was the first time she'd met Jacobs. She claimed that Jacobs provoked her when she yanked at her hair. Authorities arrested Ayanna and took her to Houston's Harris County Jail, where she was later released on bond. 2 years following the altercation, Mayweather pleaded guilty to aggravated assault with a deadly weapon for stabbing Jacobs. She took a plea bargain where she waived her right to appeal a judge's decision. Mayweather agreed to the prosecutor's recommended punishment, which involved 6 years of probation, 40 hours of community service, and that she not harass, threaten, or have abusive contact with Jacobs. Pending her good behavior, she will be eligible to have the deferred adjudication end after 2 years. Floyd probably should have read The Cat in the Hat to his daughter while she was still young so she could learn about consequences and responsibility from a young age. Oh, wait. Who are some of the biggest Playboy scammers out there? Let's dive right in and start with number 5, the deleted Playboy. Cybercrime kingpin James Aliu faced extradition to the U.S. over accusations of swindling millions of dollars through texts and emails from U.S. citizens. Nigerian-born Aliu would use dating websites to meet his victims. Once they were romantically involved, he would con them into giving him money. Most of his victims were women. Aliu was also allegedly involved with business email compromise, known as BEC, and likely stole $12 million from his victims. Although he was targeting U.S. citizens, Aliyu conducted his crimes from South Africa. Authorities suspected he was part of a cybercrime ring involved in money laundering, phishing, and internet scams. Aliyu used the stolen money for lavish vacations and excessive spending on luxury items for himself and his girlfriend. He became well known in South African social circles and on Instagram due to his extravagant lifestyle. His world came crashing down when Interpol showed up at his luxury Johannesburg estate and arrested him after an almost 6-year investigation into the scammer's activities. But his conviction wasn't going to be that simple. Somebody destroyed information linking Aliyu to the fake identity of Msweli Velenkosini while the kingpin was behind bars. Allegedly, Aliyu's biometric data from the fake identity disappeared from South Africa's Home Affairs National Identification System from his prison cell. An official at the Home Affairs Department faced precautionary suspension for deleting the information, while the Home Affairs Minister instructed the department to investigate what happened thoroughly. Aliyu was supposedly asking for help from government officials with access to a cell phone he could use in prison. Aliyu's case became even more complicated when a previous arrest for an identity fraud case resurfaced. There was evidence linking him to the identity fraud, but it was mysteriously withdrawn until he was back in custody almost a year later. The 2021 identity fraud case allegedly disappeared to allow the investigator to gather outstanding evidence. Authorities plan to refer the case to the senior state prosecutor for a decision once they were done with the investigation. When Aliyu realized the previous case would jeopardize his bail bid in his extradition case, he allegedly panicked and found a way to delete the fingerprint. But whoever removed the biometric information from the system didn't know they would still be available in the department's archives. The department had dealt with corruption from its officials before and transitioned from using passwords to access the system to fingerprints, allowing them to identify the corrupt employee that deleted the evidence against Aliyu. Since most of his victims were based in the U.S. authorities applied for Aliyu's extradition in July of 2022. The case is still ongoing. Number 4. The classic Wall Street playboy. Former Wall Street whiz kid and Ponzi schemer Mark Yagala stole $50 million and somehow became involved with some wild stories and a book deal. When federal agents seized Yagala's assets, his ex-girlfriend, Sandy Bentley, still lived in the extravagant Las Vegas mansion he'd purchased for her. Before agents took the house, Bentley's new boyfriend, Michael Tardio, and his best friend, Chris Monsoon, stole $1 million in jewelry from the safe with plans to sell them on the black market. Tardio, a nightclub doorman, had never been involved in the criminal underworld. He asked around the club to see if anyone was interested in the jewelry. When he found a buyer, he and Monsoon rented a Mercedes SUV and met with them. The pair never came home. At some point, likely during the sale, someone went after the both of them. The jewels disappeared, and authorities believed they were melted and broken down into pieces before being sold. When Bentley still dated Yagala, she lived a lavish lifestyle. He bought her a $3 million Las Vegas mansion and gave her a $100,000 per month spending account. Even though Yagala gave her cash, he still showered her with expensive gifts like a $500,000 Chopard watch and a $150,000 replica of the necklace worn by Julia Roberts' character in Pretty Woman. Mark Yagala began running Ponzi schemes when he was young and working at a tree nursery in Pennsylvania. He was inspired by the 1987 movie Wall Street, where Michael Douglas played a broker with the mantra, "Greed is good." Yagala began investing funds from his neighbors and cousins. When he was 18, he went to a nursery convention with his cousins, and afterward, they went to a strip club. Yagala's wild night ended with him buying a call girl a mink coat using his father's credit card number, which he had memorized. Soon, Yagala was addicted to buying flashy things and working as a trader. He got into pump and dump schemes, where a promoter takes a company and inflates a story to sell to investors. They would roll it into a public shell company to get it trading. They'd issue shares to offshore corporations to make it look like Yagala had less than 5% ownership, even though he and his partners controlled all the shares. Yagala followed that business model up until his arrest. Yagala loved women as much as he loved money, and when Yagala met Playboy magazine's Miss February 1999, Tashara Lee Cusino, he put her on the system he called the program. The program involved buying Cusino an expensive house, a luxury vehicle, and giving her monthly allowances on a credit card. He did the same for several other women. Then he met Hugh Hefner's living girlfriend, Sandy Bentley, and her sister, who also lived at the Playboy mansion. Bentley told Yagala that she wasn't intimate with Hefner and was dating Yagala when she appeared with her sister on the Playboy cover in May 2000. Their relationship spanned 14 months, and during that time, Yagala bought Bentley her Las Vegas mansion, several cars, fur coats, designer clothes, and jewelry. Yagala planned on marrying Bentley, but friends believed she was with him for his money. The relationship ended following his November 2000 arrest, proving the friends right. Federal agents ordered Bentley to return all her gifts from Yagala, but her new boyfriend, Tardio, had a different plan. He ransacked the mansion with Monsoon and snuck $1 million in jewelry from the safe. Someone most likely took a hit out on the best friends, which led to their double homicide. Yagala spent 5 years and 5 months for securities fraud at Pensacola Federal Prison in Florida. He published a tell-all memoir titled Wall Street Joyride, the story of the prodigy, the playmates, and the missing $50 million, where he opened up about his life before being arrested. Yagala moved to Thailand and has expressed deep remorse for his victims. Number 3. The Playboy Wannabe. Former CEO Steve Shickles allegedly embezzled over $10.2 million from his company and spent it on high-end cars and luxury purchases. Shickles resigned as CEO of Simple Helix, a tech company based in Huntsville, when the company confronted him about a PayPal account he'd secretly been operating in Simple Helix's name for more than 11 years. A few weeks later, police came to his home and arrested him after the company filed a lawsuit against him. The filing stated PayPal account took in $2.5 million and $1.6 million of that money had been moved to personal accounts belonging to Shickles and his wife Rhonda. According to the lawsuit, the couple spent the money on everything from dining at lavish restaurants, private school, spas, hotels, expensive dinners, as well as 20 luxury vehicles that Shickles kept in warehouses around town. The company performed an audit from 2013 to 2017 and discovered Shickles had been reimbursed over $3 million for payments on his personal credit card. When Shickles was confronted about the charges, he refused to provide invoices. Someone had also entered credits into the company's account system, which caused him to be paid an additional $3 million. The lawsuit additionally claimed that Shickles bought a vehicle and received loans in the company name. 3 companies sued Shickles over his actions: Simple Helix, Deep Clue Holdings, and Alpha Hosting. Deep Blue is the parent company of Simple Helix, and Simple Helix is the parent company of Alpha Hosting. They accused Shickles of international conversion, conspiracy to commit the intentional tort of conversion, fraud, conspiracy to commit fraud, breach of contract, and breach of fiduciary duty. His wife, Rhonda Shickles, faced accusations of intentional conversion, conspiracy to commit the intentional tort of conversion, and conspiracy to commit fraud. Steve and Rhonda Shickles filed for bankruptcy and listed their creditors as the companies suing them. They filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy in a federal court and listed $10 million in debt. The bankruptcy meant the lawsuit against the Shickles went on hold. Simple Helix wanted a judge to seize the couple's vehicles, vehicle equipment, video equipment, Segways, electronics, guns, tools, and everything else bought with stolen funds. In July 2022, a federal court charged Steve Shickles with 1 count of wire fraud. The maximum penalty for wire fraud is 20 years in prison and a $250,000 fine. Number 2. The Playboy Advisor. Former financial advisor Neil Bartlett conned his victims out of $5.4 million in life savings. British-based Bartlett preyed on lifelong friends, family members, and older women. He posed as their financial advisor, but the fraudster stole their money and put it towards an extravagant lifestyle instead. He used clients' funds to travel internationally, gamble, and pay for nighttime dates. Bartlett created a sole trader account under the name as the company he worked for and paid himself the money. His victims thought their money was in a safe investment account that would accrue interest. It was not. Investors trusted Bartlett, who promised they would receive good returns on their money. He used fake bank accounts and forged investment statements to make them believe their investment was increasing. Many of his victims had known him since they were in school, but that didn't stop him from stealing hundreds of thousands of dollars from them. Bartlett had power of attorney over an elderly victim who he also defrauded. One of his former clients claimed Bartlett had no morals and previously witnessed the disgraced financial advisor's community chameleon nature, which the victim had been aware of even before learning of his crimes. Local Merseyside police received multiple reports from Action Fraud, the National Fraud and Cybercrime Reporting Center, about Bartlett's business practices and started an investigation. When he learned about the hot water he was in, Bartlett fled to Russia but returned to the UK when his money ran out. Police greeted him at Manchester Airport and arrested him immediately. Bartlett claimed he lost his way after his marriage ended. His drinking got out of control, and he spent hundreds of thousands of dollars on women who help out lonely men and girlfriends. Bartlett had $1,222 in his pocket at the time of his arrest. He pleaded guilty to 14 counts of fraud at Liverpool Crown Court, with another 14 counts taking into consideration. The court sentenced him to 8 years in prison. Number 1. COVID Playboy. David T. Hines, a Floridian small business owner, fraudulently obtained $4 million in COVID-19 relief funds after lying in loan applications about his company's size. Hines applied for Paycheck Protection Program loans for small businesses. He claimed to have hundreds of employees across his 4 companies: Unified Relocation Solutions, ProMaster Movers, Cash In Holdings, LLC, and WePack, LLC. In his application, Hines stated he needed $13 million to pay his workers. He asked for several loans and 3 were approved. However, Hines didn't have hundreds of employees. He only had 12, and his business expenses were closer to $200,000 a month rather than $13 million. Hines paid his workers on Venmo or Zelle, and his largest payment was $3,000. Before he received the loan money, he had 30 cents in one business account and was overdrawn by $31,000 in the other. Hines spent the loans on stays at luxury hotels in Miami, a luxury Lamborghini Huracan Evo, and designer clothing. The criminal complaint included claims that Hines spent some of the money on dating sites. It was not the first crime Hines committed, having been arrested for battery following an altercation with his girlfriend, who he claimed stole his Lamborghini in 2018. In May 2020, he received a payment of $10,380 and $704,835. A few days later, he bought his Lamborghini. He labeled 2 $15,000 payments as mom and gave 3 other unnamed people similar amounts. During that time, he spent $4,000 at the Fontainebleau Hotel, $47,624 at the Setai Hotel, and $5,998 at the Miami Beach Edition. Police arrested Hines and charged him with fraud. They seized his 2020 Lamborghini worth $318,000 and $3.4 million from his bank accounts. Following his arrest, he was granted a $100,000 bond to stay at his mother's house while wearing a GPS monitor. He pleaded guilty to 1 count of wire fraud in a federal court, and the judge sentenced him to over 6 years in prison. Carolyn Kilpatrick was Detroit's first lady, as wife of then Detroit Mayor Kwame Kilpatrick. One late night, she came back to one of the infamous after-parties at her home, which was the famous Manoogian Mansion, the mayor of Detroit's official residence. She came home early to find Kilpatrick, let's just call it, appreciating the art of dancing by a woman that wasn't Mrs. Kilpatrick. Carlita was definitely less appreciative of the skill involved, reacted like you would any reasonable wife would react, by grabbing a blunt object rumored to have been a chair leg and then going after Kwame and the dancer. Kwame Kilpatrick wasn't a politician strictly because it was his idea. That's because politics is the family business. His mom is Michigan politician Carolyn Kilpatrick. She spent most of her career as a favorite among voters. In 1979, she became a member of the Michigan House of Representatives. Her popularity spanned 6 re-elections, and during election time, she never dropped below 80% of the vote. In 2004, she had no major party opposition, and in 2006, she was completely unopposed. By the time 2010 arrived, she was re-challenged in the Democratic primary. However, her 2010 campaign was different. She was asked fewer questions about her policies and more about the countless scandals surrounding her son, Kwame, such as the story we just told you getting out in the paper. Because outraged voters could no longer separate her actions from the scandalous ones of her son Kwame, she was now out of a job. Kwame's record seemed more like the record of a career criminal instead of a career politician. Kwame Kilpatrick was born in Detroit, Michigan on June 8, 1970. His mother was a politician, and his father was a semi-professional basketball player and a politician as well. He was just 9 years old when his mother, Carolyn, began representing Detroit in the Michigan House of Representatives. His father, Bernard Kilpatrick, served as head of Wayne County Health and Human Services Department and as chief of staff to Edward H. McNamara. Following in his parents' footsteps, Kwame got his bachelor's degree in political science from Florida A&M University in 1992. He married his wife, Carlita Poles, in 1995, and the pair had 3 children. In 1996, his mother vacated her seat at the Michigan House of Representatives, making way for Kwame, who was elected as her replacement. From there, Kwame was elected minority floor leader for the Michigan Democratic Party and was the first African American to hold the position of House Minority Leader in 2001. At 31, Kilpatrick was the youngest ever mayor of Detroit when he was elected in 2001. He was youthful and full of ideas. It just so happened that his ideas tended to benefit him more than the city. From the very start of Kwame's term, Detroit was plagued with a growing deficit. So, Kwame's quick solution was to simply close the beloved Belle Isle Aquarium and the Belle Isle Zoo. The city's deficit meant he had to make cuts from somewhere if he was going to free up any money. But the decision was so unpopular that the city council overruled him and actually increased funding. However, that growing deficit may have been contributed to by Kilpatrick himself when he leased a Lincoln Navigator for his family using city funds, and when he charged thousands of dollars for spa massages, and when he ate extravagant meals at high-end restaurants, and when he bought pricey bottles of wine, and when he charged all of that to his city credit card. Unlike his mother, Kwame was so unpopular that Time magazine actually named him one of the worst mayors in America. Diamond Joe Quimby never even got that title. The lore surrounding the Manoogian Mansion Party would later be a defining part of Kwame's career. The urban legend is that a huge, raucous party broke out inside the Manoogian Mansion, as we had mentioned at the beginning of the video. To quickly recap, then Detroit First Lady Carlita came home early to find Kwame appreciating the art of the dance in a very up-close and personal way. Carlita, less appreciative of the skill involved, reacted like you would expect someone from Detroit to react, by grabbing a blunt object, rumored to have been a chair leg, and attacked the dancer. The Attorney General at the time, Mike Cox, investigated the party and denied claims that it ever happened. Rumors spread throughout the city that Cox was covering up for Kwame because he was at the party too. There's a lot of jokes here that we're just not going to make. We'll just leave it at Kwame had Cox in the palm of his hand. The public didn't find out about the 2002 event until May 2003, when Kwame fired Deputy Chief Gary Brown after an investigation into indiscretions by the mayor's security detail. This prompted Brown to release a memo where he accused Kwame's bodyguards of misconduct and the aforementioned party. The dancer that got into the fight with Kwame's wife was Tamara Green, also known as Strawberry, a 27-year-old mother of 3. 2 men had to step in and physically restrain Carlita at that time. In the early morning of April 30th, 2003, a few months after the alleged party, Green was sitting at an intersection with her boyfriend. Green was about to drop him off when someone shot into the car in an apparent drive-by. The pistol was the same one used by the Detroit Police Department at the time. Before her passing, Green spoke about the Manoogian Mansion party, and her family was sure her murder was to stop her from testifying about it. There was plenty of evidence that the assault happened. 3 paramedics signed affidavits concerning the incident. One of those paramedics admitted to seeing Kwame and his bodyguards at the hospital where Green was being treated. Another paramedic saw an injured woman who said she was attacked by Kwame's wife. Strangely, however, any evidence of Green ever being treated at any hospital that night had vanished, and local hospitals deny having ever treated her. The family's attorney, Norman Yatuma, struggled to access information from authorities regarding the murder. Evidence pointed towards it being a member of the police department, but his investigation was sabotaged by authorities. Dirty cops gonna dirty cop. No tipster or witness wanted to come forward as they were too frightened of retribution. The judge ultimately dismissed the suit over lack of evidence. Yatuma offered $100,000 for any information about the case, but it remains unsolved. Despite his best efforts, Kwame just couldn't keep himself out of trouble. Allegations of abuse of power started when an influential Baptist minister was arrested after soliciting a prostitute, and Kwame used his power to get him out of trouble. Antoinette Bostic was the arresting officer and received multiple phone calls from the mayor and police chief persuading her not to show up at court so the case would be dismissed. Kwame funneled money from Michigan legislature state grants to 2 companies with barely any information in their project descriptions. One was called Unite, owned by his wife Carlita, who was the organization corporation's sole employee that received $175,000. The other was Detroit 3D, a company that wouldn't give details on how it was spending its funds, so not at all suspicious. Kwame cut thousands of city jobs, but found jobs for friends and family members despite their lack of experience. Their average annual salary increases were 36% rather than the 2% that the rest of the city workers received. Kilpatrick was hit with a slander suit relating to a 2004 incident when police pulled over Christine Beatty, his chief of staff, for speeding. She was furious, scolding officers who she made clear should have known who she was, because that always works with the police when they pull you over. Officers claimed Beatty called the chief of police directly to have the officers called off, which they were. The incident leaked to the media, and the chief said Beatty was harassed, and Kwame implied that she was set up. The whistleblower trial began in August 2007 after Kwame's ex-bodyguard Harold Nelthorpe and Deputy Police Chief Gary Brown were fired during an internal probe into the mayor's actions. After 3 hours of deliberation, the plaintiffs were awarded $6.5 million in damages. Kwame said he'd appeal the verdict, but approved an $8.4 million settlement a few weeks later, when he discovered that lawyer Mike Stefani had evidence that he and Beatty committed perjury during their deposition. The city council voted to pay the lawsuit that involved Nelthorpe, Brown, and a third officer from a separate case against Kwame. At the time, the city council had no idea of the confidentiality agreement that Kwame put in place, part of the settlement. The city council requested that all documents used in the suit be unsealed. Mike Stefani was deposed and revealed the existence of the confidentiality agreement that was supposed to keep intimate texts sent between Kwame and Beatty private. If those involved told anyone about the agreement, they would forfeit the $8.4 million settlement. Kilpatrick and Beatty were charged with obstruction of justice, conspiracy, misconduct in office, and perjury. The city council requested Kwame resign, but he refused. The text message scandal revealed that Kwame and Beatty, both married at the time, were in the midst of an affair. They admitted in their texts to using city funds for romantic getaways, and the texts contained evidence about them conspiring to fire Brown. Beatty quickly resigned, but Kwame wasn't as easy to get rid of. The city council passed a resolution asking for Kwame to resign with a vote of 7-1 that also contained 33 reasons he should step down. Kwame did not comply, saying he wouldn't leave and that the vote was irrelevant. In March 2008, Kwame was charged with 8 felonies and Beatty with 7. Kwame pleaded guilty to 2 counts of obstruction and no contest to assaulting a deputy. He finally resigned as mayor. Kwame showed no signs of humility during the trial, acting cocky and insincere. Judge David Groner sentenced him to 4 months in jail, as well as restitutions for the sex and text scandal, and an additional 120-day sentence for assaulting a sheriff's officer in an unrelated incident. Much to the judge's disgust, Kwame snickered while he was being sentenced, clearly not taking the proceedings seriously. Kwame didn't receive special treatment in jail, but after serving 99 days, he was released. Immediately afterwards, he boarded a private jet headed for Texas, where he joined his family in their $3,000 a month rental home. Kwame told Judge Groner that he only made $3,000 a month for restitution payments, prompting Groner to request his financial records. Kwame was back on the stand to justify his claims of poverty. His financial records told a different story. He owned a $1 million home, frequently made lavish purchases, and owned more than 1 Cadillac Escalade. When questioned, Kwame amusingly pretended to not know who paid for all of those things. The court learned that the true source of his money was from business leaders in Detroit who paid Kwame a substantial amount to get him to resign as mayor and plead guilty. Judge Groner then ordered Kwame to pay $300,000 to the city of Detroit. Kwame missed his first restitution payment of $79,000, only paying the court $14,000, then an extra $21,175 a few days later. However, this meant Kwame had violated the terms of his probation, and Groner approved a warrant. Kwame was sentenced to 1.5 to 5 years in prison and was indicted on new corruption charges. Kilpatrick lobbied for a transfer from the Oaks Correctional Facility and bounced around facilities before he was eventually released in August 2011, a little over a year after being sentenced. Kwame's next trial was in September 2012 for fraudulent schemes where he awarded contracts to the city's Department of Water and Sewage. During that time, he was also suspected of pocketing nearly $1 million in kickbacks. The prosecution had many witnesses that spoke out against Kwame, and the others accused, including his father. Kwame was found guilty on 24 counts, including extortion, mail fraud, tax evasion, extortion, and many others. The judge sentenced him to 28 years in prison. He didn't have the option for parole, as he was arrested in the federal prison system, serving his sentence in a federal correctional institution. Kilpatrick appealed the decision, but the United States Court of Appeals for the 6th Circuit upheld his convictions, and the Supreme Court denied his appeal, but he'd been mentioned in an Eminem song that year, so, silver lining and all that. Desperate, Kwame turned to none other than President Donald Trump for help. With 12 hours left in office, President Trump commuted Kwame's sentence. The White House statement about the commutation mentioned that he'd used his prison time to teach public speaking and led Bible study groups. Obviously, the only needed criteria for any sort of commutation. However, the commutation of his sentence didn't erase his conviction, and Kwame can't run for office until 2033, 20 years after his conviction. Detroit, sadly, is going to have to find someone else to run things. As of June 2022, Kwame and his current wife asked the public to help them in a crowdfunding campaign for what was titled Baby Fund, as the happy couple has just welcomed a new child. It had a reasonable goal of $800,000 and included less stuff about babies and more stuff about a luxury home and a gated community. You know, the kind of thing most people use crowdfunding for. But their humble dreams of a new luxury house paid for by people who thought they were helping a baby were short-lived. Kwame still owed a large amount of money to the city of Detroit. When authorities discovered the campaign, the crowdfunding account was tragically seized. It's unclear if he will run for office in 2033 when he's legally able. Who are some of the most heartless scammers? Let's get right into it with number 3, the doctored doctor. Anthony Flores and Anna Moore preyed upon a mentally ill Malibu doctor, pumping him full of mind-altering substances so they could defraud him of millions, right up until he passed away. Dr. Mark Sawich had an estate worth $60 million and sadly had gradually lost the ability to care for himself due to a mental illness. Sawich could no longer perform surgery or look after himself as he injured his hands during an attempt where he tried to end everything for himself. His only immediate family members were his mother and sister, who both lived in Florida, much too far away to offer any sort of care. Sawich had been 2 weeks out of another stint in a mental rehabilitation center when he met hairdresser Anthony Flores and aspiring actress Anna Moore at an ice cream parlor in June 2017. Sawich chatted with the couple and invited them to his beachfront home so they could see the sunset. There must have been a pretty fast connection since Sawich also handed them the keys to his Tesla that night so they could drive it for the weekend trip to Yosemite National Park. Sawich had been to jail multiple times for violent outbursts during manic episodes. Less than a month after meeting the couple, he was imprisoned again on a battery charge. Sawich was jailed that night and underwent 6 days of psychiatric care before he contacted his new friends, Flores and Moore, to bring him home. Sawich's friendship with Moore and Flores, as you might expect, was tumultuous. The couple had moved in with him early on, but after 3 weeks, Sawich called the police to escort them out. Sawich then texted a friend saying that the pair were tax fraud criminals that tried to steal his Tesla and home. But Sawich's legal troubles continued, and he was arrested and detained in an LA County jail after another severe mental breakdown not long after. Flores convinced the doctor to grant him power of attorney so he could withdraw enough money from Sawich's accounts to post bail and help him get his life on track. Sawich was so excited and grateful for his freedom that he invited the couple to move back in with him. With all of Sawich's accounts now at their disposal, the couple hired 20 housekeepers and other staff, including 6 massage therapists, and moved millions of dollars into their personal bank accounts. They transferred $3 million to themselves, which they used to fund their new lifestyle of buying luxury items and hiring staff to work on their business ventures. And it didn't stop there. Flores and Moore then alienated Sawich from his family and friends. At one point, they even convinced Sawich's family that the doctor was missing and said they needed $4,682.72 for their expenses and the time they spent looking for him. While the pair enjoyed the high life, they arranged weekly ketamine injections to treat Sawich's depression, something the technicians tried to fight. Flores and Moore also gave him other recreational substances, including hallucinogens. Additionally, they made Sawich have 12 hours of massage treatments a day. During one of his last ketamine treatments, Sawich had a breakdown where he talked to himself, laughed, and forcibly pressed against his ears and eyes. A few days later, Flores gave the suffering doctor another popular hallucinogen, changed the 2-factor authentication feature on Sawich's brokerage account, and withdrew another $2 million. Sawich ended up having another episode and kicked the couple out again. This time, Flores and Moore went to a luxury hotel where they watched Sawich's rapid deterioration on video cameras that were installed throughout the beach house. Although the doctor was suffering another mental health crisis, the pair didn't call the police until the massage therapist found him unresponsive. With Sawich out of the picture, Flores and Moore moved back into his home and withdrew even more money from his accounts. They claimed the doctor wanted them to have his home and a third of his estate. However, the victim's family filed a lawsuit against the couple that uncovered their scheme. Flores and Moore were arrested and charged with 12 counts. They face a maximum of 40 years for wire and mail fraud, 20 years for conspiracy to commit money laundering and laundering of monetary instruments, 10 years for transactional money laundering, and a mandatory 2-year prison sentence for aggravated identity theft. Number 2. Fattening up. Not all romance scams are completely about romance. This one falls somewhere in the sphere of friendship, romance, and just loneliness. A 52-year-old man who wanted to go by the alias Cy fell in love with a supposed woman named Jessica he met on WhatsApp. She conned him out of over $1 million, money that he needed for his wife and kids. Jessica randomly WhatsApp messaged Cy one day, claiming she'd found his number in her phone contacts and wondered if they were old colleagues. Cy responded, saying he didn't remember her, but she was engaging enough that they kept talking. Their conversations were originally about things like the food they liked, but progressed to more serious stuff like Cy's struggle to support his family and how the decision to send his father to hospice care haunted him. 2 months into their relationship, Cy was so-called pig butchered, a term that refers to the long game financial cons where scammers would fatten up their targets to take everything they have in the end, much like a butcher would with livestock. They convinced their targets to invest increasingly large sums because they believe the wins they're shown means they should invest more money. Once they're all in, that's when the butchering takes place. In this specific case, the crypto trading platforms look real, making victims believe they're legit and getting them excited about investing. When targets think they're about to make a massive return on their investment, the platform, the money, and the scammer disappears. Victims lose massive amounts of money, and these scams are so lucrative that they become increasingly common all over. Many of the scammers are victims themselves, having been lured to countries like Southeast Asia, thinking they're getting a better paying job. When job seekers arrive, the scammers take their new employees' passports and cell phones and threaten them with violence if they don't comply. Cy was one of many victims to fall prey to this type of scam, and between October and December 2021, he lost his life savings. The entire relationship played out through a WhatsApp conversation. Cy shared his concerns over his finances, and Jessica seemed to have a perfect solution. She claimed she was making boatloads of cash by trading on MetaTrader, an app he could download from the App Store. Jessica said she had insider trading tips from her uncle in Hong Kong, and since Cy's parents were from Hong Kong, he trusted her advice. Jessica guided Cy through a simulation on the app, during which he lost money. She told him not to worry and that he would quickly make it all back and more. Following Jessica's advice, Cy ran another simulated trade the next day and appeared to make $28,000. Encouraged him to invest the minimum amount, $10,000, reminding him that profits could help fix a lot of his financial worries. Cy thought about it overnight and texted her the next day, offering to put up $5,000 if she put up $5,000 too. Of course, Jessica refused, saying that Cy would have no reason to work to make it back if she just gave him the money. After some back and forth, Cy wired $10,000 to Coinbase. A few days passed, and Cy confided to Jessica that he was meeting with doctors to make decisions about the end of his father's life. He spoke about feeling like an outsider and that his role in the family was to support everyone financially. Jessica used the conversation to reinforce that Cy needed to make more money. She had to move money from his Coinbase account to Crypto.com and buy $10,000 of Ethereum. After claiming her uncle texted her with insider trading information, she guided Cy through executing a trade. He sent her screenshots and she replied with further instructions. Cy didn't fully understand what he was doing, but he appeared to have doubled his money after the trade. He was hooked and couldn't wait to make more profits. He invested a further $50K and couldn't believe his luck as he watched his money grow. Sadly, the numbers he was watching climb were fake and created as part of a loophole in MetaTrader's setup. MetaTrader is a real app that enables legitimate trades with actual brokerages by offering licenses for its software. But it also allows licensees to use Virtual Dealer, a plugin that scammers can use to manipulate numbers, making people like Cy believe they're making money when they aren't. Now that Cy was completely on board, Jessica teased him with news of a big opportunity coming up and that he would make a huge profit if he could pull the cash together. Cy immediately liquidated some of his stock, selling 120 $28,000 from his mutual fund portfolio. He bought more crypto with the proceeds, which he transferred to the crypto address that Jessica gave him. He changed the subject from investments in their WhatsApp to sharing his grief over his father's imminent passing. Jessica expressed concern, but really wanted to know if Cy would be at the hospital for the next few days because he'd be inaccessible. Hours later, Jessica messaged him with urgent financial advice, pushing him to sell more stock. Cy reminded her he was mourning his father and not really in the mood to deal with this right now. Jessica told him his father wanted him to be better. As Jessica prodded him to invest more funds, Cy secretly sold family assets and thought he'd made a $90,000 profit, which would be a 40% return. Cy had to prepare for the big market trade that Jessica hinted about and withdrew $200,000 from his home equity line of credit. By that point, he'd invested $440,000 of his own money, but it seemed worth it if he watched his investment grow to $2.2 million. When the critical trade occurred, though, his balance changed to negative $480,000. He messaged Jessica, who very curtly explained that he hadn't initially invested enough to turn the profit. Jessica said she could bring him back if he raised more funds. So Cy liquidated more of his assets and planned to raise another $150K at his father's funeral by secretly asking around. Cy raised and invested an additional $600,000 and watched his money grow to $1.1 million. Once he reached $1.8 million, Jessica said she'd finally teach him how to withdraw the money. But the next day, Cy's MetaTrader showed another negative balance. Jessica explained that he needed more money to compensate for the losses, but Cy was pretty much tapped out. He had invested and lost his parents' money, his daughter's tuition, and forced his wife to work twice as hard to support the family. With his life in complete shambles after losing over $1 million, Cy became suicidal. He sent Jessica a picture of himself in an ambulance on the way to a psych ward. She still told him it would be a sign of incompetence to hurt himself and that she couldn't do anything nor would do anything for him. Devastated, Cy begged Jessica for his money back, all the while cursing her out and wishing her family bad health for ruining his life. He did his best to escape financial ruin, and a family member set up a GoFundMe, although it only raised a fraction of his losses. In his last message to her, Cy offered to help if Jessica had been trafficked. While he didn't have the money to save her, he knew people who could help if she was working scams against her will. She never responded. Number 1. Gone again. Warehouse worker Dave Hazel sent £15,000 to his online girlfriend, except he later discovered he was talking to an African fraudster. Hazel had met Canadian Linda Smith on an online dating site in 2012. Despite only speaking through messages, the relationship developed quickly. Before long, Linda started sending Hazel frequent requests for money, which became more extreme as the relationship progressed. Hazel was convinced Linda was going to move from Canada to the UK to be with him. Having emptied all his savings for her, Hazel confronted Linda about the matter, but she disappeared from the internet. They spoke daily, but most interactions were through texts or online messages. He'd been desperate for a video call, but she refused. When they did speak on the phone, Linda seemed to have more of an English accent than a Canadian one. But Hazel fell hard for Linda and desperately wanted to start a family with her when she got to the UK.Moving countries isn't easy, so Linda asked Hazel for money for a visa, which cost £500. He wired her the money and 2 weeks later sent her an additional £500 for a medical check. The requests kept coming until Hazel spent over £15,000 thinking he was covering flights, visa complications, and more moving expenses. When Linda finally sent Hazel proof of the tickets, he saw she was flying from Ghana. Linda said she'd been visiting the country, but then Hazel got a call from Ghanaian immigration to say they detained her for possessing a large amount of money. His local bank confirmed that, based on the evidence of where he was sending the money, he was the victim of a scam. Since Hazel had voluntarily sent the funds, and there was no way for authorities to trace them, there was no way to get his money back. These are the scammers who don't care anything about how heartless their scams are. Let's get started with number 5, the homeless betrayer. Bookkeeper Darren McKenzie stole $1.6 million from his employer and friend Manraj Singh Pooney. Pooney owned a chain of pharmacies, and when he learned that McKenzie was homeless, he offered McKenzie a place to live. The pair built a close and trusting relationship. Pooney saw McKenzie as a little brother and wanted to do what he could to help McKenzie get back on his feet. Sadly, Pooney learned that he didn't know McKenzie at all. When one of Pooney's employees came across invoices for McKenzie's 3-bedroom home, the company opened an investigation. They discovered that McKenzie was using company accounts to fund his house's construction and interior design work. Additionally, McKenzie transferred money directly into his personal accounts and gave himself an unapproved raise. Mackenzie had been embezzling funds for almost 9 years when Pooney learned of his betrayal. The $1.6 million that Mackenzie stole went towards lavish expenses, such as spending $370,000 on home renovations and luxury vacations from the UK to Las Vegas and New York. He treated himself to stays at 5-star London hotels, shopping trips, and luxury department stores like Harrods and Fortnum & Mason. Mackenzie also went on extravagant spending sprees, splurging on items like expensive watches such as Rolex and Tag Heuer, designer clothes, luggage, and homeware from brands like Louis Vuitton and Versace. For a formerly homeless guy, Mackenzie had expensive tastes. At the end of the investigation, Pooney fired Mackenzie for his betrayal and pursued legal action. Mackenzie, being an apparently low-watt bulb, didn't seem to understand the severity of his situation. He was jobless, had spent most of the money he stole, and had lost access to his former company's money. When he needed a job reference, he reached out to Pooney as though nothing had happened to see if he would be willing to give him one. Of course, that didn't happen. Pooney will likely never get all his money back. During legal proceedings, the court heard that they would probably only be able to recover $33,000 from an auction as the rest of the stolen money was lost. Mackenzie pleaded guilty to fraud, and the judge sentenced him to 5 years and 8 months in jail. Maybe one of the guards will give him a letter of recommendation when he gets out. Number 4. The Black Widow Sisters. The Black Widows, a gang of sisters, married and went after unsuspecting men as part of an elaborate, sophisticated insurance scam based in El Salvador, which is Spanish for the Salvador. The sisters seduced eligible bachelors who wanted to move to the U.S. They arranged marriages of convenience, telling the bachelors that the marriage meant they would get U.S. passports. The sisters instructed the men to take out life insurance policies with their new wives as beneficiaries. Somehow, this wasn't a red flag. Once the men had the policies, they would marry one of the sisters. 2 or 3 weeks into the marriage, the women would then go after their husbands and collect the insurance money, which was up to $50,000. They looked for men with steady jobs and medium to high incomes. The sisters posed as domestic workers and told the men the women they recruited were U.S. citizens who could help them move to the United States. The sisters were Esmeralda Flores Acosta, Carla Jennifer Flores Acosta, Maria Cristiana Flores de Cruz, and Gabriela Guadalupe Flores, with Esmeralda being the leader of the group. The Black Widow sisters weren't the only women marrying men. They recruited other women by promising them jobs as domestic servants and would then threaten to go after them and their families if they refused to marry the men the sisters chose. Once the recruited women married one of the bachelors, the gang just went after their new husbands. The recruits were constantly afraid, and one successfully fled the sisters' house in El Salvador. The woman, referred to as Monica, alerted the police, reporting that she was forced to marry a man who the sisters later went after for his life insurance. Monica's escape was a pivotal moment in the Black Widow operation, and her testimony played a crucial role in building a case against the sisters. 2 of the sisters' female victims gave evidence central to the prosecution's case against the sisters. Speaking out against the sisters meant authorities had to put the victims under witness protection, which provided them with safety and support while they contributed crucial information to investigators. The youngest sister, Gabriela, married brother Toby, a famous TV evangelist and the founder of the largest evangelical church in El Salvador, Baptist Biblical Tabernacle. Brother Toby passed away at age 78, and the details surrounding his passing were suspicious. Investigators found that the autopsy revealed he had abnormally high levels of aluminum and lead in his blood. Brother Toby's health deteriorated when he married Gabriela. Given her criminal activities, people became suspicious of her and her sister's involvement. After all, the sisters looked for men whose life insurance would yield substantial payouts, making Brother Toby an appealing target. The sisters initially recruited Monica by offering her a job looking after 4 children in Esmeralda's home. Soon after the job started, the sisters threatened her with a gun and told her they would go after her and her family if she didn't marry the man they chose for her. Monica obeyed their demands and married a farmer named Melvin Ostmaro Reyes Rosa, who Esmeralda promised American citizenship. Monica kept working at Esmeralda's house after the wedding until October 7th, 2016, when Esmeralda informed her that her husband was was gone. Esmeralda instructed Monica to go to the family's house and pretend she knew nothing of his death. Monica later identified her husband's body, and the sisters made her claim his life insurance, which was $57,000. Esmeralda then withdrew the money, spent roughly $20,000, and deposited the rest in a savings account, prompting Monica to flee. The sisters forced the other unnamed woman authorities placed under witness protection to marry Edgar Criona Hernandez. Shortly after the wedding, the sisters left him on the side of El Salvador's Oro Highway, then claimed his life insurance money and pension. Another woman the sisters recruited was Fatima, who they made marry a soldier. However, they didn't go after him as they feared authorities would investigate his passing more thoroughly due to his military status. But that was only a mild hiccup. The sisters forced Fatima to convince the soldier to leave the army so they could go after him without raising suspicion. After their husbands' passings, the sisters took some of the recruited women to Mexico and forced them into working for them, the type of work you can imagine. They recruited young women in universities and shopping malls, promising them a chance to live in the United States. Once the husbands were gone, the sisters exploited the women for their illicit activities in Mexico. Eventually, authorities had enough evidence against the sisters to arrest them. They charged the ringleader Esmeralda with charges ranging from human trafficking to fraud. She denied wrongdoing, of course, claiming she was a vehicle seller and a stylist who never worked from home. The other sisters and their accomplices all faced similar charges. Number 3. The Hurricane Chaser. Eric Zico, a 36-year-old man from Orlando, posed as a licensed contractor to scam an elderly victim after Hurricane Ian. Zico claimed to own E&Z U.S. Roofing and offered his services for $47,000. The elderly victim was a resident of the Bay Indies area of Venice, which was heavily affected after the hurricane. Most of the neighborhood was in disrepair, and while residents tried to rebuild, unlicensed contractors and scammers descended upon the area. Zico was one of them, pretending to be licensed while preying on vulnerable residents desperate to fix the damage to their properties. He requested a check for 50% of the work up front as a deposit, which his victim paid. However, his actions put him on the radar of a Venice police investigator. The number of people taking advantage of the situation in the Bay Indies area was so high that police and code enforcement made daily trips around the neighborhood to protect homeowners from being targeted by scammers. The police investigator researched Zico and discovered that he was unlicensed. Authorities intervened and retrieved the check, stopping payment before it could further harm the homeowner. After police discovered that Zico was unlicensed but posing as a licensed contractor, they arrested him and sent him to jail. Officers warned residents that others like him may still operate in the area. He wasn't shingled out. We'll leave now. Number 2. The Caretaker. Care homeowner David Barton stole millions of dollars from vulnerable residents. Barton owned Barton Park Nursing Home, located in the northwest of England. He took advantage of vulnerable residents by earning their trust, draining their bank accounts, and making himself a beneficiary in their wills. He ran his scam from 1997 and 2013, stealing $3.7 million and attempting to take an extra $12 million. Barton used the money to purchase luxury cars, including multiple Ferraris and Rolls-Royces. He even sold convertible Rolls-Royces to residents for $614,000, even though they were only worth $180,000. Barton would then offer frail residents rides in the car while holding on to them for personal use. To obtain and maintain control over his victims' finances, Barton went to great lengths, ruined their family relationships, and preferred wealthy, childless victims. He would purposefully isolate them from their loved ones, making it easier to manipulate them without outside interference. One of the couples he targeted was Mr. and Mrs. Willie. The Willies were wealthy, and Mr. Willie had Alzheimer's disease. Barton convinced them to give him their sizable classic car collection and try to get Mrs. Willie to sign over all her health to Barton and his business. Barton had purposefully separated Mrs. Willie from her friends and family to further isolate her. He went as far as to hire a life coach and psychic consultants to conjure spells that would banish their family members, because when scamming the elderly, you've got to leave no stone unturned. After Mrs. Willie passed away, Barton claimed $12 million, which he stated was owed to him. One of his victims reported his suspicious activity to the police, prompting an extensive investigation into Barton's actions. Barton's mistreatment of residents was on full display at a hearing, revealing he threw a $6 million vase filled with water over a victim's family member in a rage. During the trial, the prosecution produced evidence such as bank statements, wills, and victim testimony. He was ultimately charged with 4 counts of conspiracy to defraud, fraud, 1 count of fraud, 3 counts of theft, false accounting, and transferring criminal property. After being found guilty, he was sentenced to 21 years in jail. The care home manager, Rosemary Booth, was also charged with 3 counts of conspiracy to defraud and sentenced to 6 years in jail. Barton's whole family also faced charges for their involvement in the scam. Lucinda, his wife, and their 2 sons, David Richard Barton and David Charles Barton, were charged with various offenses such as conspiracy to steal, false accounting, conspiracy to defraud, theft, and money laundering. How did Barton get that many people to go along with ripping off the elderly? Number 1. The fake nurse. Jesusa de Leda Jessie Lopez pretended to be a nurse and perform medical procedures without a degree at a weight loss clinic. Lopez lived in Winter Haven, Florida, where she worked at a weight loss clinic called Dr. Drop It Like It's Hot. If that's not a name that inspires confidence, we don't know what is. She worked with a licensed medical doctor and Snoop Dogg fan, Dr. S. Kamal Ashraf, MD. Despite being aware that Lopez wasn't a qualified nurse, Dr. Ashraf allowed her to perform medical procedures. Even though Lopez was unqualified, the clinic appeared to have many patients visiting daily, and there were never complaints about botched procedures or adverse outcomes from her unlicensed medical practices. Lopez was responsible for many different procedures. She would give vampire facelifts, which involved drawing blood from another part of the body, removing the plasma, and injecting it into the face. Images on social media showed her working with syringes and scalpels, and video footage revealed she was using lasers on patients. One video also showed her using a scalpel to remove a mole from a patient's neck. The clinic was located in the High Point Plaza, and employees of other businesses in the area thought the clinic was a scam due to its name. A woman that worked next door to Drop It Like It's Hot believed the name seemed like a joke, which made her skeptical about the place. Deputies in Polk County worked with the Drug Enforcement Agency and Department of Health to arrest Lopez. They charged her with 6 counts of unlicensed medical practice. Dr. Ashraf was also arrested on 1 count for employing her despite knowing she was unlicensed. Lopez reached a plea deal, but while she was out on probation, she continued to engage in illegal activities and violated her probation by opening a gym. When she returned to jail, she attempted to hire an undercover detective to go after her husband. Lopez was commenting about wanting her husband gone, catching the sheriff's office attention, who began investigating her. Investigators uncovered she was sending emails and at least 1 physical letter to the undercover detective. She requested he remove a tree from her house, for which she would pay him $2,000. Lopez instructed the detective to make it look like an attempted robbery so it couldn't be traced back to her. When Sheriff Grady Judd interviewed her about the statements and the letter, she giggled and laughed as though she was enjoying the attention. It sounds like she dropped her sanity like it was hot. She loved to steal life savings from British investors, selling them fake property she supposedly sold them. And she got evicted from her apartment, so she figured, why not run a scam on the way out? Let's get right into some of the most heartless scammers. Number 5. Not evicted. Homestead police have accused 3 people in Florida of using social media to run a real estate scam. Priscilla Mary Contreras posed as a realtor and utilized social media to lure victims to vacant homes. Her accomplices, Yodani Carrillis Diaz and Dinosaur Bravo, then pretended to be the homeowners and were in charge of the financial transactions with the victims. The trio listed the homes on Facebook Marketplace, and people interested in the properties reached out to the seller, Contreras. She greeted prospective tenants with her 2-month-old baby on her hip as she introduced herself as the real estate agent. She showed them around the properties, and then, if the potential tenants were interested, they would sign fake contracts and put down a security deposit and first and last month's rent. One of the homes that Contreras advertised was her own, although she was in the process of fighting eviction after the homeowner said that she stopped paying rent. Father of 2, Kenny, found the listing of a Miami-Dade home on Facebook and contacted Contreras for a tour. After seeing the property, he knew it would be a good place for him and his family. He paid over $5,000 for his security deposit and first and last month's rent. He also signed a lease. On their move-in day, he turned up at the house in a U-Haul, but when he got there, he found out that other families were also trying to move in that day. Maria Ura was 7 months pregnant when she found a rental property on Facebook Marketplace. Needing a home for herself and her baby, she gave the trio all her savings when she paid the move-in costs. Homestead police arrested Contreras in March 2022, who estimated that, with the help of Diaz and Bravo, scammed multiple victims out of $24,000. Priscilla turned herself into authorities in March 2022 following mounting pressure from family members. Diaz and Bravo are on the run and haven't been arrested yet. She faces multiple charges both in Homestead and Miami. They include grand theft, acting as a real estate broker without a license, unlawful communications device use, and organized schemes to defraud. Her attorney fought for her bond to be reduced due to her having a baby to care for and only having a few misdemeanors on her record. The judge ordered a bond of $28,500. Priscilla will need a Nebbia hearing to ensure she doesn't use stolen money from victims to pay her bond. You may be wondering what a Nebbia hearing is. A Nebbia hearing is also referred to as a bail source hearing and is where a plaintiff must disclose the source of the funds used to post bail. If she can post bond after the Nebbia hearing, the court will give her a GPS monitor and she'll be placed on house arrest. Number 4. Aussie scamming. Australian businessman Chris Marco swindled $254 million out of 340 investors in a massive Ponzi scheme that lasted 16 years. He ran it through his company AMS Holdings, an unregistered investment scheme. Over those 16 years, he used the money from trusting investors for personal uses like classic cars or to purchase and maintain properties. Through his company AMS Holdings, Marco specifically targeted people who wanted to invest their retirement assets, sometimes called mom and dad investors. He lured them into working with him by flaunting his skill for tapping into international private investment programs, claiming that it would give them high returns on their investments. One of those investors was Troy Adams, who lost $400,000 through AMS Holdings. He claimed to have lost everything through the scheme, even his home and car. Another investor, Patricia Markopoulos, was scammed out of $5 million. She became Marco's family practically when she married his second cousin. After her husband suffered from a traumatic injury, Marco frequently visited the couple in the hospital. Unfortunately, her husband passed away, but she remained in contact with Marco. Marco advised her to sell her properties and give him the money to invest. He later denied these claims, but the Supreme Court of Western Australia eventually ruled that he owed Markopoulos' family $5.9 million plus interest. Marco made it no secret that he enjoyed a lavish lifestyle. He used investor funds to purchase and maintain his properties, support his party lifestyle, and fund his car collection. In 2020, his assets included his extensive collection of vintage cars, each worth hundreds of thousands of dollars. He owned a 1971 Ford Falcon XY GTH 03, a 1972 Holden Torana Bathurst LJ GTR XU1, and a 1972 Chrysler Charger VHE40. In December 2020, the Perth Magistrates Court wound up AMS Holdings, Marco's unregistered investment scheme. The court also permanently restrained Marco from operating an unregistered managed investment scheme and forever denied him from having a financial services business unless he obtained an Australian financial services license. His court date was initially planned for July 22, 2022, but the court adjourned it several times and it's now scheduled for February 1st, 2023. He's charged with 50 counts of fraud, and that includes defrauding $36.5 million from 9 investors. Of the $36.5 million, he defrauded $10 million from one single investor. Each offense carries a 7-year sentence if the deceived is under 60, or a 10-year sentence if the deceived is 60 years or older. Number 3. Truffle trees. Between 2012 and 2014, fraudsters David Austin, Susan Dalton, and Alan Barrett misled 245 people into investing £13.7 million into fake pension schemes. Each victim lost around £55,000, although that number is much higher for some people. The person credited with masterminding the entire scheme, David Austin, committed suicide in 2019 when police called him for an interview. The fraudsters persuaded pensioners to transfer their pension savings into multiple managed schemes. Victims typically transferred around £55,000, which were moved to David Austin's account, who used the money to enrich himself, fund his businesses, and pay others involved in the operation. The trio made many false promises to the victims. They told them they would receive cash bonuses, unrealistic returns, and vouchers to John Lewis, a popular high-end British department store. When the time came for David Austin to face the music, he committed suicide. Police contacted him for an interview, and after using the money for personal benefit, it was only a matter of time before the authorities would uncover his crimes. Many victims lost everything they had to the scam, leaving their lives ruined. Pauline Padden is still reeling from the experience after losing 45,000 pounds. She was drawn into the scam when she received a text that promised her higher returns on her pension and combined bonuses for transferring her pension funds. She has been a critical care nurse since she was 18, but in 2013, she spent most of her time looking after her dying mother. After being unable to make a steady income, the prospect of extra cash was too enticing to ignore. Now she's dealing with seeing friends and coworkers preparing to retire, and since she lost so much of her pension, she's unsure when she'll be able to do the same. Stephen O'Reilly's dreams of having money to leave for his children and to put towards living in Spain during his retirement were destroyed in 2013 when the trio lured him into the scam. A person he believed to be an independent government pension advisor told O'Reilly that he was getting a bad deal on his pension. So he transferred £114,000 to fix this, with no idea that he had just fallen victim to Austin, Dalton, and Barrett's elaborate scheme. The scammers made him think he had a lump sum of cash on its way, and he ordered a new car. When the cash never came, he had to borrow money from his mother. O'Reilly was devastated, having worked long hours and contributing large amounts of money to his pension, expecting it to guarantee him a comfortable retirement. In April 2022, Southwark Crown Court in London sentenced Ian Barrett and Susan Dalton to a combined total of 10 years. They pleaded guilty to fraud by abuse of position, admitted to misleading victims during their time as trustees of pension schemes. Barrett received a 5-year and 7-month sentence, and Dalton received a 4-year and 8-month sentence. The pair were banned from acting as company directors for the next 8 years. Number 2. Con for ConMac. Nassau County Police arrested financial advisors Matthew Eckstein and Kevin Brody in 2018 for running a Ponzi scheme that scammed almost 50 people out of $12 million. Their elaborate scheme targeted vulnerable victims, mainly seniors, who they duped out of their retirement savings and other finances. Brody and Eckstein encouraged clients to invest in Conman Funding Corp., the name of Brody's company at the time. They reassured investors that their money would be protected and told some of them that the principal would be returned by Conman Funding in 2 years with 4% interest. Eckstein lured many of the victims into the scheme, as some were existing clients for another firm he owned called Sisk Investment Services. He took advantage of his relationship with them to convince them to invest in Conman Funding. They deceived their clients into thinking their money would be used to finance premium insurance loans. Eckstein told others they were putting down a certificate deposit that would receive a guaranteed interest rate. Once victims had invested, they were given a username and password for ConMac's website to see their account statements and growing balances. Victims then believed that their money was gaining interest with the company. They were unaware that the portal they were accessing was bogus, and instead of investing in ConMac Funding, their money was going directly to Eckstein and Brody. The pair used the money to fund their other enterprises, from personal expenses, paying other scheme victims, to investing in hamburger restaurants. Eckstein used some of the funds for the down payment on his elaborate home, which had a tennis court and swimming pool. The Nassau County District Attorney opened an investigation into Eckstein and Brody's business practices after an elderly victim reported them to officials. Eckstein was the victim's financial advisor and personal accountant and invested $385,000 into Conman Funding. He told her the investment was safe and misled her into thinking she had no reason to worry. Eckstein also made the victim believe that she would get her money back in 2 years, and by that point, it would have accrued substantial interest. 2 years passed, and when the victim requested the money, the company only sent her $26,999. It was a small percentage of her original $385,000 investment. Eckstein claimed she would receive the money in installments. The Conman Funding only sent one payment. She reached out to him repeatedly, but he stopped answering her calls. And in 2017, she told officials what happened. One of Eckstein's biggest mistakes was that he used the Postal Service as part of his scheme, which led Postal Service inspectors to investigate his business practices. The Postal Inspection Service worked with the FBI and the New York State Comptroller's Office, executed a search warrant into Eckstein's home office, where they found thousands of financial documents. The NCDA had enough information to arrest Eckstein in June 2018, but they were only aware of roughly 14 people he had victimized. Following his arrest, they discovered 26 more people that he had conned in the same scheme. A total of 40 victims came forward, which prompted the NCDA to upgrade his charges. They also had enough evidence to arrest Brody in connection with the scheme. Eckstein was charged with grand larceny in the first degree and conspiracy in the fourth degree. He pleaded guilty in September 2019. However, he later withdrew that plea. But then, in a new indictment against him, he pleaded guilty again. The Nassau County District Attorney sentenced him to 10 years in prison. His house is also now in foreclosure. Brody was charged with grand larceny in the second degree and conspiracy in the fourth degree and was sentenced to 7 years in prison. In October 2019, Nassau County District Attorney Madeline Singas announced that the majority of the victims received roughly $5.6 million in restitution. Number 1. Turkish properties. Haley Brown, a British con woman, scammed hundreds of thousands of pounds in a Turkish property scam that targeted business investors. Victims paid large amounts of money to Haley, with one of them losing 600,000 pounds to the scam. Between 2006 and 2009, she conned people out of more than $1.2 million. Brown was arrested in November 2009 in connection with this scam, but it wasn't the first time she faced prison charges. She served 5 years in prison for 2 counts of firearm defenses, where she disguised a taser into looking like a mobile phone and possessed a canister of CS-type gas, which is a prohibited weapon in the UK. Brown's elaborate scheme involved enticing investors into buying low-cost homes in Turkey. She invited them to Turkey so they could tour the properties and paid for them to stay in expensive hotels. She told them that people were occupying the property, so it wouldn't be possible to tour them. Victims felt that this made their investments safer since all the units they were shown were filled. She instructed victims to pay her, and then she would buy the properties in their name. The terms of the purchase were that they would receive rental income, and in 3 years, they'd either be able to renew the arrangement, sell the property, or continue to rent them out. However, the rent investors received was irregular, and they never received the returns Brown promised. She gave them excuses to explain why the money they received wasn't what she promised. Victims were rapidly losing money and asked her to sell the properties. She showed them forged official documents and fake bank statements to show that she had received the money and would pass it on soon. She also forged emails between her and her bank officials where they discussed the transfers of these large sums of money. Rather than investing victims' money into property, Brown put it towards personal expenses. She used the money to fund her lifestyle instead of allowing the victims to let it improve their own lives. She stole £1.5 million, but the court discovered that her only assets equaled £56,846 during a confiscation hearing. Those assets included a Chanel watch that cost $6,000, a Rolex watch that cost £5,000, and £45,000 that were in hidden assets. During the trial, when Judge Guy Curl asked about what happened to the rest of the money, prospector Paul Reed informed the court that none was left. The bank repossessed her home, and when they went inside, they found many counterfeit clothes that the judge ordered to be destroyed. Judge Keel ordered Brown to pay £56,846 to avoid additional prison time due to his default. He planned on turning the money into total compensation payments that they would give to the victims, which would still be a fraction of the money they lost. Later, the victims learned that she never had permission to work in Turkey and never paid taxes there. No properties were registered in her name in Turkey either, making it clear that the documents she produced were all false. Leeds Crown Court charged her with 10 offenses of fraud, 2 of using a false document with the intent to deceive, and 3 of obtaining a money transfer by deception. She denied all of the charges. In 2014, she was sentenced to 4 years in prison. Who are some of the fakest people out there who misrepresent exactly who they are? Let's get started with number 6, the creepy party crasher. Notorious New York party crasher Priantha De Silva gained entry to high society events through imaginative frauds and pretending to be someone he was not. De Silva infiltrated events by posing as an affluent man about town, a high-powered editor, and an influential movie producer. He would attend events in Manhattan and tell people he was a producer for Oscar-winning movies like Slumdog Millionaire and Crash. De Silva attended many high-profile events like the movie premieres of Stockholm and Jonathan, and parties for The Tourist and Blue Valentine. When De Silva attended Polaroid's 80th anniversary bash, he spent his evening pretending to be an Oscar-winning producer and creeping out a group of young fashionistas, which seems to be a regular thing for him. He bragged about writing for Lady Gaga and claimed he won several Oscars for Best Picture. But De Silva had a secret. He was broke and went to extreme measures to hide it. In 2010, De Silva talked his way into a charity dinner put on by the young philanthropists of the Cancer Research Institute by acting shocked he wasn't on the guest list. De Silva claimed his check must have gotten lost in the mail and gave his credit card number instead. There was a silent auction at the event where De Silva purchased a $1,500 Prada bag, which he also charged to the credit card number he provided at the door. When the event staff ran the card number he provided later, it declined, and it turned out he had used a fake Bank of America credit card. De Silva was arrested over the incident and pleaded guilty to fourth-degree grand larceny, resulting in a 2.5 to a 3-year prison sentence. Apparently, he was upset that being locked up meant he would miss fashion week. After completing his sentence, De Silva was released from prison and back to his old ways. In May 2013, he deposited 5 credit card convenience checks into someone else's account, then withdrew roughly $15,000 that didn't belong to him. A few months later, he deposited a check for $19,985, which was supposedly issued and signed by Contessa Garzadori, into his Citibank account. The NYPD was notified when he attempted to withdraw $12,500 the following day. Police went through De Silva's bag, where they found a bank statement and a check belonging to Garzadori, the driver's license of Justin Adams, and other documents belonging to various people. Officers arrested De Silva, and he was again charged with grand larceny. He pleaded guilty to the grand larceny charge and criminal possession of a forged instrument. This time his sentence was 30 months to 5 years. De Silva did his time, but refused to learn his lesson. Well, he is consistent. De Silva deposited $4,275 in checks made out to him from Artisan Russian Dumpling LLC, the legal name for Dial Dumplings, an Upper West Side shop. He used another fake check from Artisan Russian Dumpling LLC to buy a ticket to the Tribeca Film Festival. De Silva emailed the film festival to purchase VIP tickets, but the check bounced. In 2018, he was arrested again, and this time charged with stealing property from the film festival. Officers found him at a homeless shelter where he had been living the whole time. De Silva is now serving 2 to 4 years at a facility in upstate New York. If he tries to float some of his lies in prison, he could be in for some real trouble. Number 5. Actual cultural misappropriation. Kay LeClaire, a Wisconsin-based artist, shared their intricate bead and basket work on social media and Etsy. LeClaire, identified as non-binary and Native American, building a following over 2 years with their artwork. That was until the actual creators of the work came forward to take ownership of the pieces and accused LeClaire of taking credit for other people's crafts and stories. In their posts, LeClaire claimed they took inspiration from visions and dreams. LeClaire claimed multiple identities, including two-spirit, which is a term Indigenous people often use to describe a person with non-binary gender identity. Additionally, LeClaire claimed multiple ethnic identities, including Native American, Métis, Oneida, Anishinaabe, Haudenosaunee, Cuban, and Jewish. She was actually none of these. But not even being a little bit Indigenous didn't stop LeClaire from pretending, though, as they campaigned for civil rights for Indigenous people and would write academic papers and speak at conferences to raise awareness about Indigenous issues. One of the articles they wrote was about a white-owned music venue opening in Madison called Winnebago, the name for a local tribe, which Indigenous people saw as a slur. LeClaire created artwork, and by created, we mean stealing. And when discussing their inspiration, LeClaire would either make up stories or steal other people's stories. LeClaire also claimed to have worked on tanning animal hides. They hadn't. LeClaire contacted John Greendeer, the health and wellness coordinator at the Ho-Chunk Nation, to see if he had any scraps of hide to use on an art project. Greendeer was quickly suspicious of LeClaire and suspected they were lying about their abilities and history. But because of the warm and welcoming nature of the tribe, very few even questioned question LeClaire, simply accepting what they said at face value. LeClaire took an active role in the Native American community and became deeply ingrained. They co-founded a queer indigenous artists collective, the Guige Collective, where they spoke about issues of importance to the tribal communities in the state. LeClaire was even appointed to serve on Wisconsin's Missing and Murdered Indigenous Task Force. LeClaire was named the first community leader in residence at the University of Wisconsin-Madison School of Ecology, which paid $4,800 for the role. Nipinet Lansom, the co-founder of Guige Collective, noticed LeClaire would frequently not show up for work. The opinion of the collective was that LeClaire was financially draining them, as they were paying LeClaire $750 a week to not show up. Some community members were suspicious of LeClaire's indigenous claims, but tried to give her the benefit of the doubt. Even before the truth of LeClaire's identity came to light, executives at the Guige Collective planned to remove LeClaire as an owner. Lansom always had suspicions about LeClaire, who would ask her to take them to the tanning salon, as LeClaire claimed to have a vitamin D deficiency. LeClaire also always carried a bottle of spray tan, which is really weird the more you think about it. How is that even explained? LeClaire also frequently made inaccurate statements about Métis culture, which Lansom noticed and found strange. She found some old photos on LeClaire's social media pages where LeClaire had fair skin and light hair. However, as colonialism left many indigenous people disconnected from their cultures, Lansom assumed LeClaire struggled to define their indigenous ancestry. Advance Smythe, a hobbyist genealogist, decided to do more digging into LeClaire's background. He learned of them through a Facebook ad for an upcoming talk they were giving about indigenous feminism. As it turns out, Advance Smythe had some talking to do as well. Advance Smythe had noticed inconsistencies in LeClaire's stories, such as their native name, a name typically used in ceremonies or with other people in the community. Through his investigations, he found that LeClaire was a common Native American last name, but they claimed to be Anishinaabe in social media posts. He discovered through LeClaire's social media that they had claimed to be Cuban in the past, and in a Facebook post from 2017, they identified as white. The genealogist then traced LeClaire's true lineage, which was German, Swedish, and French-Canadian. Advance Smythe ultimately revealed LeClaire's true identity. They went by Katie LeClaire in 2012 and graduated from Hamilton High School in Sussex, Wisconsin. LeClaire married their high school alum Adam Pagenkopf in the summer of 2018. People immediately believed Advance Smythe's findings, having dealt with inconsistencies in LeClaire's stories for years. The Guige Collective removed LeClaire from ownership and contacted a lawyer to handle further conversations with them. They publicly stated how LeClaire's actions hurt the organization and its members from a personal, professional, and financial standpoint. LeClaire issued a half-hearted apology where they acknowledged their actions and promised to return any culturally related items in their possession to the community. Their apology wasn't well received, as the indigenous community felt she had done too much damage to reconcile. What's the indigenous name for phony baloney? Number 4. The Winetrepreneur. Former Shark Tank entrepreneur Joseph Falcone raised almost $2 million intended for his business, but put the money towards personal expenses instead. The $2 million Falcone raised from investors should have put his business in an excellent position to grow, but he had a different plan for the money. He used over $500,000 to pay his personal bills, such as the mortgage on his Florida home, and to fund his online securities trading. Falcone appeared on Shark Tank to present his wine in a cup idea, which was a single serving of wine in a sealed glass. After the successful pitch, he established 3G's Vino LLC in 2012. It was a wine and liquor distribution business based in Bethpage and Farmingdale, New York. After being featured on Shark Tank, Falcone used the TV cameo to persuade investors to put more money into the product. Between September 2014 and November 2015, he persuaded investors to hand over $1.8 million to produce the single-serving wine product. He then decided he had better ways to spend that money. The company that made the product, Copa di Vino, had no involvement in Falcone's scheme. Their founder, James Martin, clarified that Falcone didn't pitch Copa di Vino on Shark Tank and had never been an investor in the product. Copa di Vino was strictly a 3G's Vino LLC distributor and severed ties with the distribution company and Falcone in 2016. Falcone's pretending to be an entrepreneur and winemaker failed. He pleaded guilty to wire fraud and was sentenced to 24 months in prison. The judge also ordered that he pay $1.8 million in restitution to 7 of the investors he deceived. That'll be something to whine about. Number 3. School dinner scam. Alozer Porges and Joel Lowy ran the Central United Talmudical Academy, but this duo proved that not all individuals in power are as holy as they seem. Porges and Lowy were the former leaders of a Brooklyn school that was supposed to be serving federally subsidized suppers 5 nights a week to low-income and at-risk children. Many children already received federally funded breakfasts, lunches, and snacks at school. However, school was dismissed at 4:45, and the children went home without supper. Porges and Lowy lied in documents claiming schools served these children dinner. They dramatically inflated the number of meals the schools provided to receive larger reimbursements from the federal government's child and adult food program designated for at-risk and vulnerable children. Porges and Lowy then used the funds to throw social events for adults, bat mitzvahs and bar mitzvahs in a nearby banquet hall. Their expenditures included $800,000 on just chicken, not even Popeye's chicken, which would make some sense, but regular chicken. The FBI discovered the school had carried out multiple frauds to cheat the government, including diverting over $3 million allocated for school children's meals, other uses. The school admitted to defrauding the government, and Lowy and Porges pleaded guilty to fraud charges. The Central United Talmudical Academy received over $3.2 million in federal meal reimbursement programs in 2014 and 2015. Investigators realized the program never existed, and the school was putting the money to other uses. But that wasn't the school's only scheme to defraud the government of millions of dollars. The school also manipulated its payroll to hide employee income by paying workers in cash and coupons for local stores. Additionally, the school contrived tax exemptions, received technology funding unrelated to education, provided childcare without licenses, and engaged in other fraudulent activities. Porges received a 2-year prison sentence and a fine of $150,000. His attorneys argued he should only receive community service rather than prison time, as he had to care for his family. A fair point. However, prosecutors revealed that Porges left his wife with their 11 children and gave her a meager $250 per week allowance, prompting her to apply for food stamps. Number 2. George Santos. Richard Osthoff is a disabled veteran whose dog needed surgery when Long Island Republican George Santos offered to help raise funds for the operation. The seemingly selfless act should have saved Osthoff's dog's life. Instead, the money just disappeared. Osthoff was living in a tent in an abandoned chicken coop in Howell, New Jersey, with his service dog Sapphire. In May 2016, Sapphire developed a life-threatening stomach tumor, which Osthoff couldn't afford to treat. After the devastating diagnosis, a veterinary technician told Osthoff about the charity Friends of Pets United and Anthony DeVolder, a man who could help. George Santos used the name Anthony DeVolder as an alias when he first entered politics. At first, Santos appeared touched by Osthoff's story and wanted to help. He raised $3,000 on social media using a GoFundMe page. Then, the page was unexpectedly shut down. Without the $3,000, Osthoff had no way to get Sapphire the treatment she needed. When retired police sergeant Michael Bowl heard what happened, he intervened in an attempt to get the money back. Sapphire's condition worsened. Osthoff couldn't even pay for the dog's euthanasia and cremation, having been out of work for over a year with a broken leg and had a panhandle to raise the money. Bowl confronted Santos and demanded he give Osthoff the cash or use it to get Osthoff another service dog. Santos was uncooperative on the phone and claimed he would use the money to help other animals instead. The politician added that Osthoff didn't do things the way he wanted and that Sapphire was not a candidate for surgery, meaning the funds should go to another animal in need. Bowl pointed out that the money was specially raised for Osthoff and his service dog, but Santos wouldn't budge. Sapphire was also supposed to be the beneficiary of a 2017 fundraising event in which Santos charged $50 a person, but Osthoff never received a dime. When Santos was asked about Osthoff's claims, he denied ever even knowing the veteran. Osthoff did a TV interview where he called Santos out for being a fraud and keeping the donations raised for him and Sapphire. The attention Osthoff's situation raised meant that people were looking deeper into Santos's charity, with him facing allegations of not just stealing the $3,000, but also running a fake charity. His colleagues in the New York State Assembly and Senate and local Democratic organizations have called for his resignation. Also, both the New York State Democratic Committee and the Nassau County Democratic Committee called for an investigation into his behavior. Sapphire passed away on January 15, 2017. George Santos is somehow still in office. Number 1. What kind of a dealer? Australian jewelry designer Gene Wimmer once lived an extravagant lifestyle until authorities discovered he was actually running a $5 million illegal substances ring. To the outside world, Wimmer lived a life filled with glittering diamonds, flashy sports cars, a gold-plated Harley Davidson, and front row seats to Sydney Harbor fireworks display. Wimmer often took to Instagram to share his life with his glamorous girlfriend and to post photos of his diamond-encrusted jewelry creation. While he was bragging on social media, Tasmanian police had partnered with New South Wales authorities and the Australian Federal Police's National Anti-Gang Squad to reveal the truth about Wimmer and how he got his money. And it wasn't from selling jewelry. Wimmer had been running his business from his Sydney home for 2 years, which involved smuggling large quantities of illegal substances into Tasmania by air, sea, and human couriers. Police executed search warrants where they seized 4 luxury vehicles, a motorcycle valued at $2 million, in cash. They released footage of them seizing and towing the vehicles from Wimmer's home. Wimmer was arrested and charged with trafficking offenses and was extradited from Australia to Tasmania. Were these people just natural-born scammers? Let's get right to it and start with number 5, the Brazilian DoorDash. A woman from Brazil took her business to a whole other level when she became a star provider of illegal substances. Using small motorcycles and elaborate WhatsApp groups, Sue Ellen Miguez would do her business all around the UK. Miguez would live out of 3 different short-rent Airbnbs for a few days so police wouldn't catch her, with her longtime boyfriend who would execute the operation. The couple was considered by many to be a modern Bonnie and Clyde, except they're roughly 50% scummier. The couple had created a custom phone service with multiple moped drivers who would deliver the goods, who were dubbed the Asphalt Angels for some reason. The business menu included a wide array of illegal substances, from nose beers to various types of pills. The delivery men would disguise themselves as DHL drivers and make sure to deliver the goods within 10 minutes. Their lucrative business allowed them to have a grand lifestyle that included spending thousands of dollars in designer fashions. The couple spent close to $60,000 in brands like Prada and Louis Vuitton. Part of their lavish lifestyle was spent in a $13,000 a month mansion located in Surrey, a few miles south of London. The 7-bedroom estate boasted a private gym, swimming pool, spa facilities, and their own security for privacy. Added to this, they had a central London apartment with views of the River Thames. They would drive around in their orange Lamborghini and do shopping sprees in Harrods, an ultra-exclusive department store in the British capital. Everything seemed to be working smoothly, until one day police caught one of their delivery drivers in the middle of a regular day of work. After receiving an intelligence report detailing a local phone line, police were able to make an arrest. Police were able to withdraw more than $3 million worth of illegal substances, several cell phones, and more than $2.5 million evidence of illegal transactions. The operation also uncovered multiple packages of other illegal substances, including some of the largest amounts ever found in the UK that were stored away in storage lockers in 4 different locations across London. In a local hotel, they had a number of fake IDs and around $50,000 in cash. Miguez and her partner Diego de Souza ran their business operation as one of the most organized schemes there has ever been. They handed out a 10-page manual in which they meticulously detailed a code of conduct for all collaborators and payment increases based on their performance. As any large company, they expected to be number 1 among their rivals, with the obligation of making deliveries exactly within 10 minutes of any request, just as it was written in their business manual. Delivery drivers were requested to be polite at all times and have adequate posture. Miguez would oversee all operations, while all other workers would rent out the spaces where they stored the contraband, and others would organize the drivers. The operation was able to become highly successful because of the smart use of technology and the organized level in which they operated. Attention to detail was a must. After a detailed investigation and judging process by British authorities, the couple was sentenced to spend 13 years in prison each. Maybe they can pivot to just DoorDash. Number 4. Nailed it. Famous South African reality TV star Mel Viljoen and her husband Pete were under fire for the way they managed their business license. The couple, owners of Tammy Taylor Nails' South African branch, have been accused of mislabeling their products as made in the USA when in fact they aren't. According to an episode of the South African television investigation show Carte Blanche, the natives of the city of Pretoria lost the license to represent the Tammy Taylor brand in the country but didn't stop selling the product. And an in-depth investigation noted how the products were labeled by a local South African printing company. It was safe to assume their products were fake. As if that weren't enough, this wasn't the first time the company had been the focus of the investigation show. Tammy Taylor, being one of the most famous nail polish brands on the international market, rescinded their trademark rights from the company owned by Mel and Pete Viljoen. But this was just the tip of the iceberg. Twitter, as usual, wasn't having it. Twitter's moody. Multiple users went on the social media platform to denounce the company. Most of them stated how they care about their company being investigated and them being a part of the Real Housewives franchise at the same time. Other users stated they were scammers and pretty much criminals. The TV show had a series of interviews that included former business associates and buyers that had dealt with the Viljoens' shady business ways face to face. One of them had reportedly bought one of the Tammy Taylor stores they managed in Menlyn, a shopping center in Pretoria. The woman stated it was pretty clear the financial situation of the company was strange. The unnamed woman said that Tammy Taylor head offices never handed her access to their bank account where all the money was going to be deposited. So, for 6 weeks, every single earning the store had was never in her reach. But by contract, she was expected to pay all the expenses herself from the date the contract stipulated. Added to this, because of contract dates, the Viljoens handed her a demand for almost $28,000 for rent for the months of delay. The Viljoens weren't going to stay quiet. An online media outlet interviewed them, and Pete had a lot to say. They were allegedly going to sue Carte Blanche for a sum close to $110,000 for defamation of character. However, some leaked voicemails from Pete state how their business scam worked. They would hand their potential client agreements, which included a no refund clause they themselves said was for dumb people. Number 3. The fake concert. 2 women were said to organize a benefit concert for Sandy Hook Promise, a charity founded by family members of the 2012 shooting. Nancy Jean and Carissa Scott presented themselves as booking agents for an event that would feature stars like Bruno Mars and Justin Timberlake. For the show, which was slated to happen in San Antonio, Texas, the women had already managed to score a couple of investors. They told the investors that in order to book both Timberlake and Mars, they would need a combined $1.4 million. As in addition, they would be able to get artists like Lady Gaga, Usher, and Drake. A few weeks later, they received $100,000 from an investor aiming to secure Timberlake's presence in the event. After a while, the investor was worried he hadn't heard anything from Timberlake on social media. He then received a call from a person pretending to be Timberlake's manager, saying the singer was booked to the gig, but he was now requesting a $200,000 increase on his fees. As it turns out, the 2 women never even contacted Timberlake or his team. Instead, they did what anyone would do when raising charity funds for the victims of one of the worst shootings ever. They decided to go on an all-inclusive shopping spree that included Saks Fifth Avenue, almost $9,000 in cash withdrawal, and a brand new Mercedes-Benz. Given the scope of the scam, the FBI was able to catch them in the midst of it. An agent, posing as a possible investor from New York, was approached by the women and pressured to put in a full deposit, citing that both Timberlake and Mars were worried the public were seeing this charity concert as some sort of joke. Is people thinking charity concerts are a joke a thing? They actually tried to float that. Soon after, both women were arrested at JFK Airport and charged with wire fraud. Authorities commented how sad it was that these women viewed a charity that was created to support the families of victims of a horrific event as a way to increase their pocket money. And although the women were bailed for $75,000, chances are they'll spend some time in jail pending their trial. Sweaty Alex Jones was probably really hoping these 2 would take some of the heat off of him. Number 2. Prison Boss. While in jail, a man in Nigeria saw an opportunity, and he made a lot of money with it. Hope Olusegun Arok, who was serving a 24-year sentence at a maximum security prison in the African country, was able to create an elaborate scheme that included multiple collaborators and earned him a whopping $1 million. Arok was also able to evade Nigerian authorities when he was ill with an undisclosed condition and taken to a hospital. Arok escaped and went back to living his regular life. He moved to different hotels, saw his wife and kids, and even attended social events. Arok seemingly had always had access to resources that weren't usually granted to inmates: internet and phones. With this, he created a complex internet scam system that saw no boundaries and scammed people across continents. Using a fake identity, he opened 2 separate bank accounts and, while in prison, bought a Lexus. Added to this, he had access to his wife's bank account PIN code, so he was able to freely transfer funds all over the place. Arok was originally convicted in 2012 for internet fraud after he spent some time as a student in Malaysia. Arok would tell his victims he was a computer science student at a university in Kuala Lumpur, but was in fact the head of a web of fraudsters who worked primarily online. He was sentenced to serve 12 years after being charged for wire fraud, check cloning, and forgery. Nigerian investigators were hesitant at first to disclose whether or not there were any involvement with prison authorities, but as expected, there was. At least 3 officials from Kirikiri prison, where Arok was serving time, were arrested for a direct involvement in helping him run his in-house scam. They were linked with having helped him escape prison and roam around the city freely while still technically serving time. Arok had allegedly received a referral letter from the man in charge of the prison's medical facility to go to a hospital and then escape. Number 1. Africa's #1 car dealer. Adesua Renee Ogiozi became a prominent businesswoman when she opened her own car dealership. The Nigerian native said her business came to be due to an unforeseen situation. Her cars were stolen while she was living in Dallas, Texas. The vehicle was later found, but the situation pushed her to establish her own company, Adesua Motors International. According to her, the company has become the #1 car broker in all of Africa. Through her business endeavors, Adesua has obtained multiple awards, including the Nigerian Women Achievers Award, Business Entrepreneur of the Year 2018, Heritage Award Business Executive of the Year 2019, and many more. Her company has reportedly sold over 3,000 cars throughout Africa, with many celebrities and famous musicians being some of her top clients. But Adesua's success came with a price. After an investigation, the FBI charged Adesua for a fraud where the auto dealer allegedly stole millions of dollars. Added to this, she was charged for an alleged romance scam for the value of $560,000. She was first accused of conspiracy to commit fraud in 2020. In tandem with her business partner, Olateyu Ogunleya, a businessman from Atlanta, Adesua reportedly withheld $560,000 from a female client based in New York. According to FBI statements, Adesua had moved around $3 million in her American bank accounts. There was no clear indication to where the money was coming from. The investigation also showed that she had made over 1,000 false tax claims to the IRS. At first, investigators thought her fraud attempts were limited to a romance scam for only $12,000. But upon further research, they discovered Adesua's financial crimes were far deeper than they had initially thought. After her arrest warrant was issued, it took authorities a full year to locate and arrest Adesua, to which she simply stated she couldn't understand why it took so long for them to catch her. While Adesua was released on a $25,000 bond, her bank accounts were frozen pending the fraud's investigations. Her U.S. passport was withdrawn and her daily movements were limited to 3 hours a day. This added to the fact that her tax information was looked under close inspection, with the FBI discovering that in 2016, Adesua had declared her company's earnings to be only $872,000, with $862,000 being expenses alone. In 2019, her personal income was reported to be only $120,000, all of it being business expenses. Her public lavish lifestyle on social media didn't help either, where she had become a notorious Instagram star that flaunted her luxurious possessions and being the #1 auto dealer in Africa. While she is still being prosecuted, Adesua faces up to 20 years in prison for wire fraud and conspiracy to commit wire fraud. She's probably got some good sales going on now, though. Click to watch one of these next videos. Let us know in the comments section what you'd rather have at a restaurant. Tip on your own, or have 18% more expensive prices on the menu, but don't have to tip at all.